Continuing on in our study of ethics, we need to look at the definition of ethics. And so ethics is the philosophical investigation into how we ought to live our lives, not how we should live our lives, but we're looking at general theories, and we're deciding what is right or what is good. There are two different branches of ethics. One branch is applied, one is theoretical. Applied ethics is the examination of a specific problem. For example, abortion. All the controversial issues that you can think of, those would be applied ethics because you're simply going to look at one issue and decide on its specific ethical value. Is it good or is it bad? So you can look at abortion, you can look at marijuana laws. Again, anything that is currently in the news that is really controversial is going to be applied ethics. And so if you are interested in that type of philosophical discussion, we actually have an entire course here at the college at South Campus by Dr. Maria Colavito, who teaches an entire semester on just applied ethics. How do we get into the discussion of what is good and what is right to a specific problem? And then we have the other side, which is theoretical. And that's what we're really going to be looking at, although we'll occasionally have some applied brought in because we'll use specific examples. But overall, we're just looking at the general nature of good or right actions. When we start looking at an ethical theory, what does an ethical theory need to do for us? It needs to provide a standard for determining what is good or right. You need to decide for yourself what is good and right. You need to question yourself. You need to think about what is my view on all these different issues, and you figure out what your ethical stance is, and then you question everything based on what you have as your moral compass with ethical behavior. And so we need to have some standard that we can base it against. And so that's what ethical theories do. They try to give us some kind of standard. The other thing, it must provide a justification for the standard. It can't just be saving 40,000 lives is ethical, period. It can't be a conclusory statement. It can't be an ends without the means. So you need to go through the means. You need to set up the whole argument, and that provides your justification for the conclusion, but we've got to have that to begin with. It also should differentiate between what is and what is not morally significant. Sometimes when we look at issues, sometimes there's specific aspects of it that we don't need to worry about. There's certain moral things that we would look at that we just don't need to bring into the discussion with a particular issue. But at other times, there are things that are a little bit more important that we need to look at. For example, when we're examining the issue of whether the death penalty is ethical, we are going to have certain things that we decide are morally significant for us, and some things are not. That's going to be a completely different look at marijuana laws. Whether someone smokes marijuana is quite different from whether someone should get a death penalty. Because they're completely different issues, we can have the exact same standard applied to both. So we're going to have to, again, figure out what our moral compass is for what is good or for what is right, and then we look at the issues based on that, but we do have to bring in some of the ideas of, okay, this is not really important for us to talk about when dealing with marijuana laws. We do not need to look at whether the action has harmed someone else. For example, in the issue of death penalty, we need to think about what are the victim's rights in this aspect. Versus with marijuana, we don't even need to worry about a victim because all we're looking at is the person who smoked it. And then a few ethical themes. Sometimes we'll look at the status of moral guidelines. In other words, are the moral guidelines subjective? The value of a life, does that change from person to person, or should that be an objective? And so again, we could tie this into the idea of moral relativism and also just the idea of relativism If I talk to a group of serial killers, they're going to have a much different view of what the value of life is. If I talk to a doctor, a different view as well. And so I need to see if what is the value of life, what are the moral guidelines for it, and are those simply subjective? I think this. Are they relative? This group thinks this. Or are they objective? This should apply to everyone. We also need to look at what matters. What are the issues that we need to think about, and why are we looking at them? What are the consequences of our action? If I come to the conclusion that the death penalty is ethical, how will that reinforce my moral compass? And then we need to think about the action itself, the issue of killing someone by the powers of the state for that person taking another person's life. Do we look at just the action? You killed another person? Is it the intent? Sorry that my examples are always controversial and gruesome for the most part. I don't know why that is. Are we looking at the fact that this person died and this other person killed them? Or are we looking at the intent behind it? And if we start looking at intent, for example, then we're looking at the idea behind accidental versus planned. And that's something that we do look at in our criminal system. If you're driving a car and you accidentally hit someone, that's much different than drinking and then getting in your car and driving. That's much different. I hate my neighbor, so I'm going to run him over. We need to decide, are we just looking at the action itself, the killing of another human, or why that person was killed? And finally, we need to get some general rules. Are the moral rules that we're coming up with absolute? Killing a person is always wrong? Or are there exceptions, looking at self-defense, etc.? To give you some specific examples. And we need to decide, does morality serve to protect the individual or the community? When we punish someone for killing another person, is that just helping protect individual members of society? Is it meant to protect the entire community? So, for example, looking at that, again, we would look at with death penalty or the idea of killing another human being, if the person for some reason is found not guilty and it was a high-profile crime, do we need to put them in, or does morality serve to protect the individual or the community? Looking back at killing of another person, if we're looking at whether it serves just the individual, this is the idea that we would take witnesses, possibly in death penalty cases, mob-related cases who their lives are in jeopardy, we put them into witness protection. We're just targeting one person. Or does the law target the entire community? Do we want to have a general idea of what is right and good for the idea of taking another life? Should it apply to everyone in the U.S. or everyone in the world? Or should it just apply to a few individuals in a particular group?